Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to be here to talk to an audience of people from so many different areas with a topic which should be of very broad interest because it does involve art and it does involve mathematics. And in particular, it involves people and their stories. So I'd like to start out by saying that as a secondary school student, I was very fortunate to see something which impressed me right from the very beginning, and that was this painting. I was a student of 17 years, and I lived in New Jersey, but I was able to go to New York once a year, and I would go to a museum. And the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, had this painting, which I stood in front, and I wrote in my book, Salvador Dali's Crucifixion is impressive. Okay? I found that many years later, and I realized how impressive it was because I did have a chance to meet Salvador Dali, and this proves it. Okay? This is a picture in 1975 with at the St. Regis Hotel, where Salvador Dali would come and stay for several months. Is this working? Okay, I saw someone. Okay, he would stay for several months, and he would meet people that he invited to come and talk to him about what he was currently doing. And well, I have to explain to you how that happened, that he invited me. That's Dali on the right over here, okay? And that's what I looked like in 1975, okay? The painting itself is very geometric. It involves perspective from several different points of view. Down below, there's a planar perspective, and above, a cubical figure, which I recognized as a geometry, but I didn't understand the fourth dimension connection at the time. But later on I did, because the dimensional analogy is what makes all of the different dimensions fit together. The analogy said if you start out with 4 sticks, you can put them together to make a square and stay on the plane. If you have a box and want to send it to a friend in Göteborg, you can get a larger box and mail it, or you can send this in the mail. But if you send this in the mail, your friend has to have something else. What does he or she have to put it together? Instructions. Okay. What are the instructions? The instructions are, this has been folded out so it can be sent in an envelope, but you put it together, put these edges here, this edge is here, this edge here, and then put the top on, and you have a cubical box in 3-dimensional space where the information has all been 2-dimensional, a 2-dimensional plane region, and puts things to put together. But you have to go out of the plane to build the cube. The next thing is an analogy, and the analogy says, if instead of taking a square with a square on each side and a top, you have a cube with a cube on each side and a top. I made a model of this. Let's see if I can get it to work. It's very nice that it's flat because it's easier to get through the airport when it's flat. But what you want to do is open it up, and when you do open it up, you can see that it really does represent this figure that is an analogy of the cube folded up. This is a cube surrounded by cubes. I removed a few faces to make it fold, but the instruction set is just to match the colors. So you can match the reds here, and you have to match the orange, the yellows, and the white, which you can sort of do, but you still have to match the purples and the greens you can't put it together in three-dimensional space. You can't put this together in three-dimensional space any more than you could put this object together and stay in the plane. You really do have to go out into a different direction, a different dimension. We don't have it, but at least this tells us how we would be able to represent some kind of an object in four-dimensional space and send it in the mail, again with instructions, and your friend in another part of 4 dimensions would be able to put it together. So that's fine, that's instructive, interesting, and what does it have to do with mathematics? Well, the next thing you need, if you're in graduate school by this time, is an advisor, okay? And my advisor is Professor Churm. Professor Churm is a wonderful, wonderful geometer, and had a lot of good problems. And for each of his students, he would try very hard to find out what they were good at, what they liked to do, what kind of interesting ideas they had, and then try to find a problem that would work for that. So he knew I liked to make models. So he gave me a problem that involved analyzing a structure which was relatively simple. And again, folded flat, that's very important. Here, okay. This is a polyhedral donut. Again, the donut shape comes up again and again in mathematics. The nice thing about this is that it had a special property. I'm not going to go into my whole thesis. I'd love to talk about it for the next 5 hours, but I won't do that. I would say that what we were studying was what would happen if you cut this by a plane, cut it across. Well, no matter how you cut it, it falls into at most 2 pieces. This has the 2-piece property. And it turned out that that was a very important mathematical idea, because if you have a smooth torus, a smooth donut, see, I have a smooth donut here. Well, it's not quite a donut. It has the 2-piece property. If you cut it, no matter how you cut it, it falls into at most 2 pieces. It's even better than that. If you bite this, if you have a donut and you take a bite out of a donut, you never get more than 2 pieces, 1 piece inside your mouth and 1 piece outside. It's hard to believe that you can get a thesis for proving that. Of course, it's just the beginning of a whole series of problems, but these problems on showing when something's unique is fine. The year I was born was 1938, and during that time, Alexander Danilovich Alexandrov proved that if you have one of these things, there's only one way to put it together. You can't put it together in a different way. And so I decided I was going to try to prove a modern version of that would work for Polyhedra. And so I wanted to prove that there was only one way to put this together so that it would have the 2-piece property. I worked for 6 months trying to do that until I realized there was another way to put it together. So I disproved my own conjecture. You don't get a thesis for disproving your own conjecture. But fortunately, the problem by that time had suggested other things that turned out to be more difficult and also true. So that's my story of how I got into the object itself. And the next part is coming to Brown University. The last pictures were taken at Berkeley, where I got my PhD. But at Brown in 1967, I came, and one of the first persons I met was Charles Strauss, who died just a few years ago, but he was exactly my age. He had just finished his thesis on computer graphics. I had finished my thesis on geometry. I needed new techniques. He needed new problems. It was absolutely perfect. And we worked together for 22 years, proving a whole series of things, developing software, that's what Charles Strauss said, and developing geometry. This picture, you can see, would not be 1967. We didn't have these devices, but by 1980, this picture was taken for a magazine in 1980, we had joysticks and things that we could actually move some things around on the screen. But this is a Klein bottle up there, which could only be built in four-dimensional space, but you can't build it in three space, but you can take pictures of it. And that's what computer graphics enabled you to do. So we were in business trying to show people different ways of using these materials. This attracted the attention of a newspaper article writer for Washington Post. I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to talk to me for a couple of hours, which he did. And he had somebody take a picture of me with my model. And behind it, it had the picture of Salvador Dali's painting, which they described. You can't read what it says, but it spelled my name wrong every single time. But the picture was accurate. What happened was that it carried not just the beginning page, but then talked about the applications. The picture over here was a picture of the sort of thing that we were taking at that time on the screen. Not just a cube, but something related to the object I showed here earlier, rotated in a different direction, and that was a hypercube, a four-dimensional cube. And that people really found interesting. In particular, Dali found it interesting. He subscribed to a clipping service, so someone sent him a copy of it. And he said, this is just what we need, because we were also experimenting with stereoscopic films, things where you wear glasses and see two images and put them together. So he called. I came back from class at one day. There was a message saying, call so-and-so in New York. So I did, and a woman said, oh, I'm Senor Dali's appointment secretary. He wants to meet you. And Charlie Strauss had said to me already that when you show a picture like this, you have to ask permission. And he knew that they had not asked permission from the Metropolitan Museum. So Charles said, it's probably a lawsuit. So we called, and the woman said, no, Senor Dali just wants to meet you. And I said, well, what do you think? He said, it's either a lawsuit or a joke, but the worst we can get out of it is a good story. And we got lots of good stories. In particular, he is the most unusual person I've ever met in my life. Okay? He acted in public, and there were a lot of people around, and 20 people sitting around. We were the ambassadors from mathematics land. Okay? And he wanted to talk about stereoscopic oil paintings, project he'd done. He had just finished doing a whole series on holograms. He loved science and loved using science in different ways. So he wanted to talk to us about what we were doing. The little box in front of him is a viewer for stereo slides, where we had a number of films that we had done on complex function graphs and surfaces of different sorts. He wanted to see all those films. So I can show you one of the ones that he, I think I can show you. Oops, come on. Well, it worked earlier. Why is it not going on? Mm-hmm. Oh. This is Tonali Tonyemi, who is brilliant. Okay, this is the first film we ever made in 1968-69. It's, again, the Taurus, the object that we came back to again and again, but it's rotated because it sits in four-dimensional space, and as you rotate it around, different parts get projected in different ways, and so it really, certainly, really turns itself inside out. It's not a smooth torus like the balloon. It's covered with polygons, but at a certain stage, it gets projected so that it goes infinitely far away. It took us forever to make this because each image would take well over a couple of minutes and 30 frames per second. So we ended up with about 10 or 15 seconds worth of film, which we showed over and over again. But I want to stop now and show you a series that we did to show what it's like to look at a donut from different points of view. In one case, you see two circles, one inside the other. In another case, you see two circles next to each other. And that turns out to be important because later on, we realized that as this object goes all the way out to infinity, we can stop it and rotate it. It's distorted now the way the balloon was before it really got to its full inflation. But here it is moving away, and you can see that on the right, it looks like perfect circles. On the left, it's a polygon, but the polygon lies in a circle. You have to believe that. But we're getting up to the part that was the most exciting for me and which Dali liked the most. When we were out at infinity, when we saw this, we couldn't really believe how beautiful it was because we had seen still pictures, but until you see it move in this way, you don't realize that it totally separates all of space into two congruent pieces, a hole around a hole. Well, again, as I said, that itself, we're turned inside out now, so we have to go out to finish out the world. This film, Dali really liked because he kept seeing different parts of it. He wanted to see a stereo version, which he was less impressed with. We also were less impressed with it. But at that point, he was asking us technical questions about, about how we made the film, what we were doing with it, and where we wanted to go from there. I figured if he's asking me a lot of questions, I can ask him a question. So my question was, where did you get the idea of using a four-dimensional cross in a religious painting? And he said, Raymond Loewy. He said, Raymond Loewy. I said, do you mean the 12th and 13th century mystic and polymath who in Spain? He said, yes, you know about Raymond Loewy. I just happened to know about Raymond Loewy because a friend of mine was teaching a course, and he invited me to come to sit in on the class. And he talked about this man from 12th, 13th century, who, it turns out, was one of the people who invented the computer. Well, my computer graphic friends tell me everybody knows Raymond Loewy's Ars Magna, the great art, where he had circles, and you could, in each circle, you could put the hypotheses for an argument, and you turn the circles until they fit together, and it would read out the answer. Now, some people have told me this is a forerunner of Babbage's computing engine. It may or may not be, but in any case, this is one of the pictures from Ars Magna. And so I said, this is looking good. Dali had used a four-dimensional cross, and from this book that he appreciated the most, there it is. This is a picture of the martyrdom of Raymond Loewy. He had a tough time at the end of his life. These are listed as two separate paintings in the collected works of Dali, but that's a mistake. Why is it a mistake? How many artists do we have in the audience? Come on. Why shouldn't this be listed as two separate paintings? Because it is the same painting. It's just upside down, and it's lit. It's rough. It's texture like marshmallow. And you can see there's a little swirl here, and if you rotate it and turn it around, a little swirl over there. So not every art historian realizes the mathematics of symmetry. And well, anyway, as I talked to Dali, he was fond of talking about school of mathematics and design that came out of it. This is an architect, Juan de Herrera, famous architect who was a Lullian, and he wrote a book called Discorso sobre la figura cubica, a cubic form rather than the squares that that his master had used. And he also designed El Escorial over in Spain. So that was 300 years after Juan de Herrera, and here's Dali over 300 years later, taking it from the second dimension to the third dimension in architecture into the fourth dimension. In the meantime, he drew this painting, which is a stylistic view of some of the pictures in the Ars Magna, which would be a square faces covered with words, but now it's a cube, and inside the cube, there's another cube. And from each corner of the top one to the middle one, there's a Juan. It's a Juan de Herrera putting them together. This is homage to, so Dali knew it. This is a picture of a four-dimensional cube, quite different from the one that he had used. Now, you can read lots of books and you can see his pictures, and sometimes the books will put things chronologically. That painting was done in 1954, and this sculpture was done also in 1954, exactly the same time almost. And when I looked at that and then looked at the other painting, it reminded me of something I had seen. By this time, I had visited the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. They have a library showing the books that Dali used when he was an art student. Well, modern versions of them. And one of the books had this picture in it. Of course, this is the Leonardo da Vinci kind of thing, and you can see shadows. It's really a very nice picture studying perspective. And of course, these things where once you see it from one view, you look from another view, okay? And then you can look at it lying down, and you can look at it sideways, you can look at it from above, and this is the book. Traité de perspective à l'usage des artistes. A treatise on perspective for the usage of artists, and you can read the date down here, 1750. This is the oldest thing I own. I bought it on eBay for $100. Okay? The reason I could get it for $100, it was in condition mauvaise, terrible condition. But it's okay, I wanted to take it apart anyway, right? And so inside, we saw those other pictures, but then this picture. This is taking two crosses and putting them together in the same picture. I can imagine Dali talking to somebody about the fourth dimension, seeing a picture like this and saying, I remember that in one of the books I used in perspective when I was a student. And sure enough, there it is. So he took that and developed it. This is the book cover of the most famous historian of art in the late 20th century, or late 19th and 20th century. And again, it uses the same thing, Linda Henderson. Now, I want to tell you, I've told you how he thought about this, using this symbol. Now I can show you how he drew the picture, how he made the picture. I mean, he didn't pose somebody sticking there like that for a long time. And in fact, this is a picture of his wife, who was at the same hotel. And this is the way he did it. He took a picture of her and colored it. I didn't know that artists did that, but they do. In some cases, they have to. He could have just drawn a picture of her. But here, up here, he had to put it together. And what he did was, quite separately, have this picture. This is from the Vatican Museum, where they have this preliminary sketch. And it turns out that he had done, well, this was in 54, but in earlier 50s, he had done other pictures using the cross. And this is the St. John of the Cross. This is in Glasgow, in Scotland. And it's the view of the cross from the top, God the Father looking down. And to do that, he used a stuntman. Okay? This is a man named Russell Saunders, who made most of his money in the movies. You can see he was very athletic, he's very strong, and he could jump off the top of a building, or not very tall building, or the top of a mast of a ship in a pirate movie. he did lots of standing in for famous art, actors. And he said when he died, that they had in his obituary that he said this was the only time he stood in for Jesus Christ. And he was very proud of himself for being the model for that thing. Now, just in case you think that maybe we're making all this up, this is a picture taken by Dali, about Dali in 1954, showing that indeed he did have the two models right in front of him to work with. He liked this model very much. Okay, so he was quite pleased to see that mathematical be done. So that was 1975. In 1976, he called us up again. He said, "Come down, bring your latest things, and I'll show you what I'm doing." And he said, "Let me give you a book, Dali, Dali, Dali," signed Dali, 1976, pour mon ami Banchoff. And, well, I said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "I have a copy of your picture here. This is, I bought it for $3 in San Francisco on the street." And he said, "Oh, let me sign it." So it says, "Pour Banchoff, homage to Dali, 1976. So now it's worth even more than, it's probably worth twice as much, maybe $10, who knows. In any case, he was fun because in 1976, something else happened. There was the first time we really exhibited in a gallery, the Carpenter Gallery at Harvard University, where I had taught for 4 years, but we were invited to come back there. And these are names of people. Harriet and George David Brisson were from Rhode Island School of Design, which, as far as I can see, is very similar to aalto art and design and architecture. Well, you'll see later on why Charles and I got our chance to do that.
We start with a square, which is really a head-on view of a cube, which begins to rotate.
I hate listening to myself.
Our first impression of a rotating 3 cube is that of squares sliding. This is the revolving door illusion. If we rotate the 3-dimensional cube about a different axis, we get parallelograms and rectangles, images that we readily interpret as the shadows of a rotating 3-dimensional cube. But now we rotate in 4-dimensional space. Our first view of a rotating 4-dimensional cube gives us the impression of 3-dimensional cubes sliding, the revolving door illusion in one higher dimension. If we stop the 4-dimensional rotation and revolve around an axis in 3 space, we get something which resembles a wireframe model, like the frame of a box kite. But now we rotate in a different plane in 4-dimensional space. This is our first really good view of a 4-dimensional cube. It has 16 corners, 8 on the red cube, 8 on the green cube, with corresponding corners connected. But as we rotate in 3 space, we see that one 3-dimensional face is still quite flat. We rotate again in 4-dimensional space, this time leading to truly general position. At almost any instant, the 4 edges that come out of one of the corners have no 3 lines lying in a plane. Stopping our 4-dimensional rotation, we show a 3-dimensional spin around an axis where we see the red cube and the green cube interlaced.
I'm going to go into the next phase of it. This is a film that was made in 1978 and was shown for the first time at Helsinki at the International Congress of Mathematicians. In 1978, it was one of the largest groups of mathematicians ever get together. And we had a show of this film as the beginning to show people how to start thinking about objects in 4-dimensional space. This is rotating an object in 3-dimensional space in perspective. So it looks like if you looked into a box, the end would look smaller than the beginning. And if you do it in 4 dimensions, instead of having a square inside a square, you have a cube inside a cube. As it begins to rotate, it does something that my little model here couldn't do. It really turns inside out and goes through itself. One of the things that's quite surprising is that it reverses orientation. This looks like a creature swimming through itself, but it's just the views of an object being rotated in 4-dimensional space and projected into 3 space. This is one of the best views where the red cube is now largest and the green cube is small. The red cube flattens out, turns inside out, and now is the smallest furthest away cube. So when you rotate in 4-dimensional space, you could rotate a right hand into a left hand. Things that are congruent but not superimposable can be done in 4-dimensional space. So, Dali would invite us down each year. For the 10 years we saw, for 10 years from 1975 to 1985, we saw him at least once a year. He would always give us a call when he was in town, and I saw this when he was working on it. This is a film that started out for image recognition, the way they do now in the airlines. But to look at this, if you're over 50 years old or over 45 years old, you can take your glasses off. Otherwise, you have to squint almost close your eyes. And if you look at it, you see that the large painting is actually very similar to this small painting, which looks like a black and white area for President Lincoln. But from my point of view, it's a couple of hundred gray squares. But up above, Dali made it into a picture of Gala looking out a window. And I know how he made it. I could watch him working. He had a little telescope, such as you use in an opera, and he turned it sideways so he could look at it, and what it made it look as if he was 40 feet away from it. He'd look 40 feet away, and then he'd go up and he'd paint a little bit, and then he'd come back and look at it again, paint a little bit, look at it again, and finally he stopped because he thought he had what he wanted. So this is, it was really great to be able to see how he worked and how he did things. Of course, he had other paintings that also used optical illusions. This is a famous one where you have the floor and above the sculpture, and if you look at it with your eyes almost closed, it's the skull of Zurbaran. So he, as I said, was interested in stereoscopic paintings. This is not stereo, well, this is the Athens, the Raphael painting in the Vatican. And this is another painting that has the same thing on the top, the same arch on the top. This is the Fire at the Borgo, also in the same series. The only thing that's the same is the arch. But what you can do is put them next to each other, put on stereo glasses, or just make your eyes wall or come together. And you'll see a stereoscopic feature. Of course, they're two separate paintings, so inside your head, it's bouncing back and forth. Beli Gulish in MIT had studied that phenomenon quite a bit, and Dali was playing with that. Dali liked to play inside people's heads. Yeah. And so, for example, he was at that time planning another crucifixion, this time from a totally different view. And how was he going to do it? Well, exactly the way he did any of these stereo paintings. He posed the figure. He posed the figure, and once he got the figure that he wanted, left side, right side, he could paint the two things. And they're quite different. You see the sun isn't quite in the same position. Well, it's not that far off, but it is. You get a definite stereo effect if you look at it in the right way, or if you have a device that can make it easier for you to look at it. So he was almost completing his collection of views of the cross by doing this. This is the only painting Dali has that has the word fourth dimension in the title. Quatrième, à la recherche de la quatrième dimension. And you see a couple of polyhedra here. That's a cross. This is the only one where he had a melted watch. I could say that toward the end of his life, there was a conference with mathematicians and physicists. The physicists always wanted to say, the melted watch, that's relativity. And he said, no, it's a cheese, a camembert cheese that melted in the sun. They say, no, no, it's space-time. He said, no, it's a cheese that melted in the sun. In any case, it gives people a chance to talk about the difference between fourth dimension in physics and fourth dimension in mathematics. We're talking about a geometric fourth dimension where every one of the dimensions is exactly the same. They're interchangeable. But if you talk about an appointment, I'll meet you at the corner of 3rd Avenue and 4th Street on the 5th floor, you'll miss the appointment unless you have a fourth number, time, 10 o'clock. 3, 4, 5, 10, you'd get there. That's using time as a dimension, all right, but it's not interchangeable with the others. So mathematics and sculpture and physics do have connections, but they're not identical. Of course, that's great. You don't want them to be the same. Another mathematical painting in Dali's religious period, which was largely in the 50s, 60s. This is a sacrament of the Last Supper, a recreation of the Last Supper. The figure of Christ is, so this is not the actual Last Supper, but what happened after the resurrection. And of course, it's sitting inside a dodecahedron because, well, 12 apostles. Now, Dali was interested in perspectives of different sorts. And one of his what he did in surrealism is take a figure which looks fairly realistic and then take a feature of it and distort it for a purpose. Here's another example. And this was in preparation to do a stereoscopic painting. And so there was actually a show at the Guggenheim Museum of the stereoscopic painting. And when we came down there, we were sitting aside so he could see what we were working on for a new project. The new project is something he designed in 1980. He signed it, Banchoff, Dali, 1980. When an artist does something, you talk about being on canvas with oil paints. This is magic marker on shirt cardboard. Okay, it was just a sketch he made using a black marker, and the sketch was for a project, the 100-meter horse. The idea was that you would come out of a gallery and you'd look up and you'd see a horse, and it looked like a very nice horse until you walked around to the side of it and realized it was 100 meters long. It only looked good from one position. Okay. Now, why did he want to do it? Well, it's an extreme in perspective, but he wanted to develop it, and that was 80. This is 1981. He had changed instead of having a 100-meter horse, he wanted 100-kilometer horse. So you would stand here, and as you came out, you'd see the horse looking down at you, and you'd see the rump, the back end of the horse, far away. But it would look fine from one point of view until you walked aside. This is Toledo underneath here. The following year, he was in Paris, and he wasn't feeling well, but it didn't stop him from churning out new ideas. He had this picture here, where the idea is that you'd stand here and you'd have a nice picture of the head of the horse, and the shoulders of the horse would be on a mountain, and the rump of the horse would be on the moon. You'd have to see it not only from the right place, but also the right time. Okay? Now, it was pretty clear this is never going to be built. Okay, it never was built. We never got any further than these drawings, except that we did do take the plaster horse and digitized it so you could see what it would be like. This is what it's like to be inside a horse, like a Trojan soldier. Anyway, I told my students in my class, I teach a class every other year on exploring the fourth dimension to a group of first-year students from all different disciplines. They have to be from all different disciplines, different places, different countries. And they have to do a big final project. I told them this story and showed them those slides. And I said, well, there's one thing that's certain. This horse is never going to be built. Now, you don't say that to students. Why not? Well, watch us. We're going to build it. And they did. This is a nice view, nice perspective view of a pony. That looks pretty good until you walk around it. It's a little suspicious already because the head is attached to the shoulders by a rod, and the backside is back. Here we are, head, shoulders, rump. There was a folding chair behind here, but my wife took care of that with Photoshop. Okay. So what we have is a place where everybody in the class took his or her turn, sitting in just the right place to see the sculpture. And well, I brought it in for several years. It's disintegrating, I'm afraid. It's not a perfect thing, but it certainly was good. It fit in with a complete little report that these three students did. The young fellow went off to become an architect, and the one in the middle became a mathematician. I've lost track of the other one, but they were so pleased with themselves because they had done an excellent project, and everybody agreed. Now, this is similar to a picture that I showed earlier when we were talking about a sphere rotating around and projected down. Here we have the sphere colored with the bands, and if you project from the top point, the image would be down below. So that's what is on the top would be the sphere rotating and having its images. The bottom is a much bigger figure. It's like the Taurus, this donut shape that we looked at in the very first film that we showed, but this is 1983, 63, 73, well, 23 years later. By this time, this was shown in many, many different statements at the big graphics conference and in magazines. So the images became quite a bit better, quite a bit more interesting, and quite a bit faster to draw. So we could actually see things rotating in real time. We'll see a little bit of this anyway. 1985 was about the last time we saw Dali, so he did see this film. But he died in 1989, and toward the end he was quite ill. But we did have a chance to see him at that time. I'll just show a little bit of this. I have a colleague, a graduate student, and an undergraduate were the co-authors for this. And we won't watch the whole thing, but we will take a look to see how it's used here and how it was used at SIGGRAPH, the big graphics conference where people show off. These images were used as one of the handouts that they did. Here we're trying to show that if we paint the sphere, we end up painting the plane that it's sitting on, and vice versa. And as we rotate the sphere, the image down below seems to swim along. And now we want to take that up one more dimension. So instead of having a couple of disks, we have a purple torus and a green torus, and in between we have donuts. One of the donuts stretches all the way out to infinity. I told you that that one image was the one that excited us the most. So this one itself now is a moving version of the film that was the basis of the poster for this talk. Here's the hypersphere rotating around. And each of those bands, the blue bands, is a doubly twisted circle. I mean, the boundary curves are planar, which you can see there. So again, these films became much easier to make, much smoother, and certainly took a lot less time. Dali did see this, and Dali, in his final painting, was working on a different kind of thing. It wasn't stereo or any of that. It was perspective again. This is the station at Perpignan in Andorra. This was a favorite painting of his, and also of a mathematician, René Thom. René Thom is a Nobel Prize type Fields medalist who developed a theory of catastrophes, which this is a typical diagram that you would see, where it really looks like a piece of cloth being folded, and indeed that's called cups and folds. And people would analyze paintings and analyze structures on the basis of what happens. It's very smooth on one side, and as you move across toward me, it develops this S shape, so it changes its form quite a bit as it moves across. So that's catastrophe theory. And here's my favorite painting. This is from the National Gallery of Art in Ireland. It's Jacob blessing the children of David. And here they are over here, the oldest one and the youngest one. And this is Jacob he's just before he's dying. And he's supposed to be blessing the two children. And instead of, he crosses his hands. It's in the Bible. So the favorite of David is not the one who got the blessing, it's the other. But the most important thing from the point of view of folds and cusps is wonderful pictures of cloth, which was done so well by this Italian artist. And the best thing is right up under the arm. Right up under the arm is what's called the butterfly catastrophe. It's a double fold. It's very important, but it's very hard to find it in a good painting, and that's it. So again, paintings like this get analyzed, and of course people very much analyzed Dali's final painting. That's what this is. The final painting is based on catastrophe theory. I should say that this picture was taken in 1985, just a week before my wife and I arrived there to visit for 2 days. So this was in a magazine, so we got the magazine, the beautiful picture. The door here is just, it's with paint peeling on the wall, is a picture of a door. So it's not even it's just painted on the wall. So Dali loved, again, to play tricks on people. We showed him the picture of this, which was slices of what's called the Veronese surface. I don't have the film to show you here, but it really had all these different slices, and as you look at the slices, you realize that, well, it's making changes, drastic changes as you move down, and that's an example of catastrophe theory. René Thom and I actually wrote a short paper about that, this figure itself and its form. This is one of Dali's last paintings, called the Transduction of Europa. It's a sort of geological form, but it's the only painting where Dali put an equation in. And this is the form that describes the geology and geography of it. So this is the final painting. It's based on a cubic curve that makes the S shape. It makes the shape of something on a cello. He had a cello next to his easel. He also had a picture of his mustache that's up there. And the S shape becomes this kind of chalice form, which, considering that this was his final painting, the fact that it has geometry, mathematics explicitly, and theology, religious symbols fine. There's a mistake in it. This is an angle. It's supposed to be a cusp. Dali would not have made that mistake in his prime. As it was, he didn't make the mistake. He wasn't actually painting very much at that time, but he was directing it because nobody there can do anything about mathematics, and this is full of mathematics. Next to it were Tom's book and one of our books. In 2004 was the 100th anniversary of Dali's death, of Dali's birth. He had died 15 years earlier, but in his museum in Figueres, Spain, you can go in there, and if you go up to the second floor in the vitrine, in the symbol, you see there is a familiar object. The wooden cross, the unfolded cross. When I met Dali and showed him this model, the first one I showed you, he looked at it and said, after he liked to play with it, he turned it upside down and moved it around, and he said, I may have this. It wasn't exactly, but I said, oh yes, you can have it, I can make another. And he said he wanted it for his museum. So if you go to that museum in Catalonia, you'll see it there with the original model he did, a picture of the picture, and the object itself. And if you put a 25-cent piece in, it will rotate around and play liturgical music. So, a little bit strange. They recreated Dali's studio. Dali's studio that I showed you earlier was in Pubal, which is some distance away from Barcelona, or from Figueres, where this picture is taken. They recreated his studio, and they put this picture up to show what he was working on at the end. And what's wrong with this picture? It's backwards. It's backwards. The people who worked for him don't know mathematics, okay? And he wasn't around to set them straight. But so this is the way it's supposed to be. And well, we started a quarter after, is that right? Yeah, so I have a few more minutes. So I could say this is it, that's the end. But I wanted to show you a couple of new things, simply because there are some new things. I retired 6 years ago, and we had a wonderful exhibit of all the work from all the time. And we built the largest unfolded cross ever built, I think. It's 12 feet high, okay? And this is the president of Brown University, Christina Paxson. She wasn't worried, it's stable, it's not going to collapse on her. But she came around to see a special view of everything we had there. This is the people putting it together. The three things on the bottom were very stable. They were solid. The things on the outside are very light, and the top doesn't have to support anything. But it worked. These are my students. I said I teach a class of 20 beginning students, and this is the last class I taught. And you can see on the wall were pictures of a lot of the things we did. But these students were all first-year students. And a special thing was the 6 students here, these 6 students, the 3 down below and the 3 up at the top, the one on the right-hand side I'll talk about in a minute, but those 6 students were from the Rhode Island School of Design. They have what's called a dual degree. They get accepted by Brown University, which is hard, and get accepted by Rhode Island School of Design, which is even harder. And in 5 years, they will get 2 degrees, one from RISD and one from Brown. And so these students said, one's from engineering, one was from psychology, another one was from literature. They were from all over the place. And we had a wonderful time. The student on the right-hand side is a professional artist who was a junior. This was only for freshmen. She said, I have to take this course. I've taken everything in mathematics over at my college, and this is the thing I want more than anything else in the world. So I said, well, you can't take it because you're not a freshman, but you can be my assistant. So she is. And she's still working in Providence, Rhode Island, and was a wonderful assistant. This is one of the students in the class, Gabriela Gonzalez, and she constructed, along with some of the other students, this model, which I will end with, I think, because I was able to unfold it here. This is actually from my thesis with Professor Churm. It's a box that has the same coloring as the little cube I started with, the red, the blue, and the white. And you see the red's in one direction, blue's in another, the white's in another. And you really have to fold it together, not just in 4 space, but also in 5 space and in 6 space. And in 6 space, this is the first surface that was ever found anywhere, which has the property that it sits in 6-dimensional space, and any cut cuts it into at most 2 pieces. If you have any smooth surface in 6-dimensional space, you can always find a cut that cuts it into more than 2 pieces. I can't go into details, but I'll say when I found this, Professor Churm and Professor Kuiper, my secondary advisor, were astounded because they didn't think anything like this would exist. And not only can you do it, but you can teach your students how to make it. I gave this talk at the Museum of Mathematics in New York City, and there were 75 people in the afternoon, and everybody made one of these. Well, they worked together making these things that fold all the way down. And then had to do the same thing in the evening. And I think that's it, except for this last type that brings us up to date. 1978 is when the only other time I came to Finland. I came to Helsinki for the International Congress of Mathematicians, where we showed our films, and there was a repeat performance. They asked us they filled the hall, and then they wanted to have it again. It's not such a great picture because there are some black and white images that are fading in the background. Those are the ones that we were able to do at that time. And every single topic has new theorems, new results, and new pictures. And one of the things that mathematicians do, and artists do too, is if you've got a good model and a good topic, you come back to it again and again, and each time you have a new technique, you have a chance to see what it does and what it tells you. So, that's my story. And thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we have time for questions, comments.
Any questions? Any comments? Any complaints? Yes.
How would you say that? Is it on or off? Okay, that's fine. I would say so depicting those objects.
Yes.
We see them in different ways. It's a bit striking for me on this, where all the images are about seeing something that looks like another, like say for instance, like this stereographic projection. When you do it in 2D, it looks like this other object that we know. Oh, in your opinion, how do representing those higher dimension objects in 3 space change the way that we think of them?
How does the representation change the way we think of them?
Like they can exist abstractly by defining them as, oh, I would imagine something that behaved like this.
Yes.
And
well, it's true that sometimes you really do have to operate from imagination, but most of the time it's the dimensional analogy. When you want to draw a picture in the plane, you just have to have 2 numbers for each point, the x coordinate, y coordinate. and it will draw it. If you want to draw something in three-dimensional space, you give three numbers, and well, you could make a construction, or it could say, if you made a construction and took a photograph from this angle, this is what it would be. And that's what you do in four-dimensional space. You describe something and with these, using linear algebra, and then you explore it by choosing the different viewpoints. That's one of the best ways, but you can also modify the object and see what would happen as it grows and changes. So you are guided by what you've seen work in the plane and in three space. I can remember Charles Strauss coming and saying to me, "You've got to come over, Tom, because we made this beautiful thing on the screen. And it's great." And I came in and I looked at it and I said, "It is beautiful, but it's not correct." And he said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, look what happens when you rotate it. It's doing something that it can't do." And I hardly ever looked at the output. But I said, "What did you do here?" Well, he said, I divided by that thing. I said, "No, you're supposed to multiply here." So he went over and put in the punch card in those days, and he ran it again. He said, "It's not so beautiful anymore." I said, "Yeah, but now it's right." Okay? By looking at a lot of things, you know what to expect, and if something comes that doesn't work, you realize that's a good way to check. You become familiar. That's the idea. Okay? Well, okay.
So this might be a little bit vague, but what is your favorite shape?
My favorite shape. I guess I'd have to say two. Well, one is this model that got me my thesis, and the other is the Taurus. I mean, I was teaching at UCLA, and I came out of class one day and I went past this store and I said, "What's that?" I ran in and I said, "Where did you get that balloon?" He said, "You mean the donut balloon?" It was a store for birthday cards, birthday parties. And he said, and I said, "Well, where can I buy these?" And he said, "Well, Google donut balloon." And the only trouble is you have to buy 30 of them at a time, but they only cost 40 cents. So I really do like the Taurus. As you say, it was the first thing we drew, and it comes back again and again, sometimes in higher dimensions. And sometimes I'm still working very hard to understand something where I know all the formulas, I know the description, and I cannot picture it yet. But I'm still trying. I'm still working. That's what that kind of mathematics is about. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for coming, and I love being here.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my necktie. It's the final Dali picture. Somebody was supposed to ask that question.